So Critical Role exists, and they have a massive fan base. Stop me if I'm blowing your mind yet. And while it is incontrovertible, inassailable, incontestable that the RPG and Dungeons & Dragons actual play channel, Critical Role, has been one of the most successful, influential, and defining projects of the role-playing game hobby, at least in the 21st century, that time might be ending. Because as we enter the arguably most important moment in Critical Role history, and consequently a massive moment for the role-playing game hobby as a whole, there are cracks starting to show. And more people on the internet have begun to notice that Critical Role appears to be in a crisis that seems to be getting worse and worse. And while I thought that this was just classic anti-Critical Role hatred, when I looked into it, I actually think that it's true. And I actually think that it's worse than most people believe. So what's going on, and can it be prevented? Can Critical Role be saved? Because, spoiler, yes, I want Critical Role to do well. Before we go any further, I have to come out to you now as someone that actually likes Critical Role. This shouldn't come as a massive surprise. I've covered them on the channel before, and don't get me wrong, I'm not like Critical Role fan number one. I don't watch all their content, and I don't own any Critical Role merchandise, unless those Polaroid pictures of Matt Mercer count, but I don't think they should because they're homemade. But I wish Critical Role well. I like them, and I would like them to succeed. I don't think that they've done anything to earn the ire that they seem to routinely inspire on the internet. So then, in that vein, I've grown pretty concerned by information that has recently been revealed or talked about in public, at least. It wasn't announced by Critical Role or anything, but it has been gleaned by sleuths on the internet, presumably with a giant magnifying glass, because that's what the word sleuth calls to mind. That or child detectives, which really breaks a lot of labor laws when you think about it. See, Critical Role is extremely popular, and their numbers for an actual play roleplay stream that play Dungeons & Dragons live is insane. Like, seriously, pick out any random episode of Critical Role on YouTube and likely it has at least 500,000 views. This easily outpaces anything else in, well, Dungeons & Dragons, role-playing, or even ostrich baiting. But there's just one problem. That might be changing. See, last year, people started to notice that Critical Role's viewer numbers were dropping pretty hard and fast. Like when Wile E. Coyote realizes that he's standing in midair. And I do not use the Wile E. Coyote metaphor lightly. To give a bit of context here, across the year of 2020, Critical Role used to average views of around 60,000 viewers per Twitch livestream. That's a whole lot of viewers, double the subscribes I have on my entire channel. So, you know, subscribe. Hell, it's more than the Pope gets at St. Peter's Basilica. So I think that Matt Mercer could arguably be justified in determining the center of Christendom. This is what some would call really fucking good for Critical Role. However, good times don't always last. Unlike the Atlanteans that descended into the form of ape men, Critical Role have degenerated from where they once were. Because if we look instead to January 2023, things start to look a lot better for the Holy See. Because Critical Role have sank all the way down from 60,000 viewers to just 11,000 viewers. That's a seismic drop, a sixth of what it used to be. The equivalent of going from the Liver King to just some guy. And predictably, people began to worry. And I think this is where I first began to hear murmuring that something was wrong in the Critical Role landing page. But I wasn't worried, because there is a pretty obvious explanation for the drop between 2020 and 2023, namely the release of Enola Holmes. Well, aside from that though, there was also the zombie plague, and in 2020, everyone was stuck inside their houses, painting Warhammer, watching Critical Role, and wondering what to do with all that toilet roll. Almost everything nerd related, or just non-work related, got a boost during those years, so it was always inevitable that the number of viewers would decline for Critical Role after 2020, because the views had always been artificially inflated. So I wasn't concerned. And hell, 11,000 average views is still a hell of a lot of views, especially for a Dungeons and Dragons live show, so who the hell cares? But then 2024 rolled around and things got a whole lot worse. Like, really worse. Really worse, which sucks because it could mean the end of Critical Role content. And personally, I like content. I don't like it when content goes away. Though I do have the one problem that when I'm watching TV, movies, and actual play streams, my hands need to be occupied with something. Otherwise, they immediately turn to snacks, endless doom scrolling on my phone, or simply trying to find dangerous chemicals. Very bad. Luckily, today's video is sponsored by Fume, and this genuinely changed everything for me, because Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that helps to break bad habits. And what is a flavored air device? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. You simply breathe air through a fume and it is flavored, all without the use of harmful chemicals or electronics. It's entirely natural. And Fume has been fantastic for me because it gives me something to do with my hands that isn't reaching for another bag of snacks or drinking all those nasty, dangerous chemicals. Very bad. And it's something that I can fidget with. It's even designed with movable parts and magnets exactly for that reason, giving your fingers something to do which helps to de-stress them while breaking out of those bad habits. It has been absolutely perfect for me. So join Fume's 150,000 customers and try out Fume for yourself. Head to tryfume.com/dungeons or scan the QR code and use code DUNGEONS to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack. There's a ton of different flavors available, like sparkling grapefruit, crisp mint, and orange vanilla, or even my favorite, maple pepper. Who knew that air could taste so good? Hikers did. Hikers trapped at very high summits, desperate for one last suckle of air. Again, that's tryfum.com and use code DUNGEONS to get 10% off your order. Thanks for sponsoring today's video, Fume. Now, we're in 2024, so if the fall in views for Critical Role was the result of a natural decline after everyone was stuck inside their house, we'd expect that things would have leveled off and settled on a new average by now. We would have grinded down to the core audience. But that's not what has happened. Instead, if we look at the latest numbers for Critical Role, say at January 2024, we see something pretty alarming. The numbers are still going down. Compared to 2023, they have more than halved, dropping from 11,000 average viewers to just 4,500 viewers. This downward trend is continuing, and it doesn't look to be stopping. It looks to be getting even worse. And this isn't just the Twitch live streams either. This is impacting their YouTube channel as well. Numbers in the latest Critical Role D&D campaign videos are all down significantly when compared to their previous campaigns. And this has begun to worry a lot of fans, but others are taking a sort of vindictive pleasure in the whole thing.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Although I gotta say, in The Dark Knight, Alfred was just propping up warlords in Myanmar, right? I mean, that Joker analogy wasn't stealing diamonds to watch the world burn, he was stealing British diamonds to undermine an imperialist regime. He was stealing diamonds for a reason, Alfred! It wasn't just that he was the Joker! Oh no, it's the anti-British Legion of supervillains! Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy! Now, why is this happening? Is it the revenge of the Pope? Well, perhaps, but not permitting a prognosis of perfidious papal plots of the potent pontifex, possibly paralyzing progression, there are other particular possibilities being proposed. And maybe the most obvious one is the content. Critical Role is currently in campaign numero 3, and it has proven to be incredibly divisive with fans. And this is the reason that many folks say less people are watching the show and that the viewer numbers are declining. Now, the supposed problems that people have with campaign 3 are pretty myriad. There's frequent comments that the characters being played by the Critical Role crew are just too chaotic, that the party they've made are overall less serious when compared to the makeup of older campaigns, and that the plot of the campaign has been really slow, mostly because the players haven't been following the main story, and instead they have spent a lot of downtime on frequent stops and starts, all in the service of silly side schemes and side adventures. And while this makes for good memes, it makes for worse story. Wow, stopping a narrative to tell jokes. I can't imagine what goes through their heads. Regardless, there's definitely been a lot more criticism of the campaign as a whole, more than I remember than for any previous Critical Role content. And while I have some sympathy with some of these arguments, I don't think that they explain what's going on because the decline has just been too stark and steady. Like Ned before the whole head thing. And it's not like Campaign 3 is the only Critical Role actual play series that has been affected by this decline, because Critical Role do other shows, perhaps most notably Candela Obscura. It feels like only yesterday that the new, not Call of Cthulhu, but really Call of Cthulhu horror RPG was finally released and shown off on the actual play channel. And Candela Obscura is really interesting, at least to me, because it is the very first Critical Role first party game being played in a Critical Role actual play. That's historical, and it's really cool, and people thought so at the time too. The very first episode of Candela Obscura on YouTube hit 1.5 million views as people crammed in front of their wee televisions, I think they're called telephones now, to see what the new game would be like. And the answer was sort of like Call of Cthulhu, but mixed with a bit of Blades in the Dark. So, Call of the Dark, or Blades in Cthulhu. The game itself, when it was released, was the subject of controversy. There were some major missing components within the system, namely death as a mechanic, which was patched into the game post-release. The game itself has received a ton of criticism, and some of it is fair, though some of it has been not so fair in my opinion. Overall, personally, for me, I think that it's okay, but nothing world-shattering. But after the launch of the game, across the last 10 months that the actual play series has been active, views on the Candela Obscura show have dropped. They've dropped really hard, in fact, to pretty dire levels. Right now, the show averages around 2,500 views live, and they can only get around 50,000 views on each YouTube video. That is a pretty significant drop from 1.5 million views for the first episode, even if we would have expected a fall off in viewership after people's curiosity about the system was sated. And actually, just as an aside, as a result of this viewer tail dive, I suspect that the Candela Obscura actual play series is probably going to be cancelled soon. That number of views just can't be sustainable for the channel. Between the sets, costumes, actors, production, editing, hookers, each Candela Obscura episode must be burning a hole in the Critical Role pocket. I mean, I average around that number of views, and the only way that I'm able to make this channel work is by relying on Patreon and tax evasion. And I only pay a single editor a living wage. Speaking of which, by the way, check out my Patreon for bonus videos every month, an entirely free game, access to live streams with me, and of course, an awesome Discord community, and help support the channel. I probably shouldn't have mentioned that bit about the tax evasion. But for Critical Role, 54k views is rough and can't be sustainable. I mean, the show is a marketing tool for Candela Obscura, the game system at least, but is it worth the cost? I can't imagine that it would be. And Critical Role have cancelled shows in the past that have done better numbers than this, so, you know, Candela Obscura. But regardless, what is the explanation for the Critical Role viewer crisis then? Well, in my opinion, I just honestly believe that the free-falling view numbers for Critical Role is simply the natural result of the show being on like episode 300. A drop in views was always going to happen. Every show loses numbers as it goes on, and the novelty of the storytelling wears off, and the next shiny thing pops up. Like Pogs, or Beyblade. Remember those? Regardless, committing to a huge D&D campaign over the course of like 4 years is quite a commitment, no matter what way you slice it, even if you are just watching. COVID has made the figures starker to look at, made the drop seem even bigger, but I don't think that Critical Role are doing anything wrong in their streams. This fall is simply inevitable. And I think that the Critical Role crew probably always knew that. Just like we all know that the heat death of the universe will one day claim us all. But you know, we just try not to think about it. That is, of course, unless it doesn't, because Critical Role have made a massive gambit against the declining views, not the heat death of the universe. They're still working on that bit. Because Critical Role have an ace up their sleeve. Daggerheart. Their new proprietary RPG is coming out. Hell, it's already kind of out as a playtest. And I think that Daggerheart potentially renders this entire conversation about decline pretty moot. Because with the launch of that game next year, Critical Role are evolving way beyond their original scope as just a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors who sit around and play Dungeons and Dragons. They're becoming a multimedia company, kind of like Wizards of the Coast, except in reverse.
It was me.
Chris Cox. Because rather than trying to get out of RPGs and into movies, TV, and giant holograms of geisha who are inexplicably trying to sell you birth control pills like Wizards of the Coast are, Critical Role are instead getting into RPGs from the movies and TV shows. And okay, there's no giant Laura Bailey hologram, I guess, but you know, there could be. And I think that this move is clever. I think it's more sustainable than just relying on celebrity and million view videos on their YouTube channel and merchandise like novelty hats and little cute plushies. Better to build a solid foundation of games and rely on the Critical Role channel to act as the marketing wing of Darrington Press. And I really believe that this is the future of Critical Role, and it represents a massive shift in the RPG marketplace. Certainly, Daggerheart looks promising and like it really could knock D&D off the perch as the main big RPG that every new player gets into. Or, you know, at least punch it in the crotch a little. And in a world where Daggerheart has replaced D&D, well, I mean, who cares about Twitch numbers anymore? Maybe the show will just go back to being about fun and less about putting on a show. In the meantime, their first Daggerheart live stream got 751k views only 3 weeks ago, and their latest update live show hit 7.4k viewers watching live, and that's just patch notes. That's a playtest series of patch notes. The views on that should be way lower, but clearly there's interest in the system and playing the system and in the novelty of the system. And I think this interest is going to translate across to the channel, because I suspect that Campaign 4 of Critical Role Season 4, it's going to move systems from D&D to Daggerheart. Certainly the world and the setting is gearing up for a massive shift to accommodate for it, and I think that this will bring views, not lose them. If Candela Obscura can get 1.5 million views as a niche horror game, who knows what the limit is for Daggerheart. And if you're interested in finding out more about Daggerheart, I'll be reviewing it for patrons next month in a bonus video. I do a bonus Patreon video every single month. This month, it's a review of Malifaux. Next month, Daggerheart playtest review. So check it out on patreon.com/discourse miniatures and support the channel. And a massive thanks to my patrons, especially CryptoKev, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye!